There's a painful truth most people don't like to admit. Life doesn't always pay fairly. In fact, sometimes it pays you with something that feels almost insulting. You give your best years, your energy, your loyalty, and what comes back feels small, broken, or meaningless. And here's the paradox: those moments, the ones that feel like the ultimate injustice, are often the ones that reveal who we truly are and where real change begins. Most people believe injustice is loud. They imagine shouting, chaos, confrontation. But the most damaging injustices are quiet. They come wrapped in contracts, policies, and polite language. Everything looks right on paper, yet something deep inside you knows it isn't. And that's the kind of injustice that leaves scars, not on the body, but on the soul, the kind that makes you question your worth, your choices, even your faith in people. Let me say something that might sound uncomfortable at first. Not every unfair situation is meant to be fought immediately. Sometimes, the real test isn't whether you can react, but whether you can endure without losing yourself. That doesn't mean accepting abuse. It means understanding timing, understanding character, understanding that dignity isn't always defended with noise. Sometimes it's preserved in silence. If you've ever felt humiliated without being able to respond, if you've ever accepted less than you deserve just to survive, if you've ever been treated as disposable after years of loyalty, then this story isn't just something you're watching. It's something you're recognizing. What you're about to hear isn't a fairy tale. There's no instant miracle, no money falling from the sky, no villain struck down dramatically. What happens here is far more realistic and far more powerful. This is a story about quiet strength, hidden value, and the kind of justice that doesn't destroy, but exposes. A story where care matters more than force, and character speaks louder than revenge. And here's the counterintuitive promise: sometimes what looks like the worst payment of your life is actually the starting point of your greatest revelation. Not because the injustice was good, but because of what it uncovers. As you listen, don't rush. Let yourself see the parallels. Think about your own experiences, the moments you swallowed your pride, the times you felt unseen. This story has layers, and if you stay with it, you might recognize something you've been carrying for a long time. Before we go any further, let me ask you something simple but important. If stories that touch real life, real pain, and real growth matter to you, take a second to subscribe to the channel. Like this video, not out of habit, but as a way of saying this message matters, and share it with someone who might need to hear it today, someone who feels like life paid them unfairly and doesn't know what to do with that weight. Now, let's begin. Because sometimes the most powerful stories start with something that looks completely worthless and end by revealing the truth about everyone involved. There are injustices that arrive shouting, breaking doors, turning tables over. And then there are the ones that arrive quietly, almost politely, holding paperwork in one hand and indifference in the other. This story begins with the second kind. Ramon had worked the same land for decades, the kind of work that bends a man's back but strengthens his character. He didn't complain much. He didn't demand applause. He simply showed up before the sun and left after it was gone, day after day, year after year. And when the time came for him to ask for what was rightfully his settlement, his farewell, his chance to finally start something of his own, what he received wasn't money. It wasn't gratitude. It was a dying donkey, old, skin stretched tight over visible bones. He's tired in a way that only living beings who've been pushed too far can understand. Not dramatic, not loud, just humiliating. Don Fermin, the wealthy landowner, stood firm behind his papers and clauses. Everything, according to him, was within the contract. And he wasn't lying. That's the most uncomfortable part. Legally, he was covered. Morally, he was bankrupt. This is where many people watching quietly lean back and nod because they've been here before. Maybe not with a donkey, but with something that felt just as insulting. A severance that didn't match the years given. A promotion promised and never delivered. A contract used like a shield to excuse behavior that felt deeply wrong. You think about speaking up, but then reality taps you on the shoulder and whispers, "Careful." Complaining might make this worse, so you swallow it. You take what's offered. You tell yourself it's temporary. And inside, something heavy settles in. There's an old saying that fits perfectly here. Some injustices don't scream, but they weigh on you for a lifetime. They don't leave bruises on the skin, but they leave marks on how you see the world. Ramon didn't raise his voice. He didn't accuse. He stood there, holding the rope of that dying animal, realizing that what he was being paid with wasn't just a donkey, it was a message. This is how much your years are worth to me. And here's where the lesson quietly starts forming, even if no one names it yet. Abuse doesn't always come dressed as cruelty. Sometimes it comes wearing legality, calm language, and a smile that says, "I've done nothing wrong." That's why it's so dangerous. It makes you doubt yourself. It makes you question whether your pain is justified. After all, the papers say everything is fine, right? If you've ever been in a situation where the rules were followed but your dignity was ignored, you understand Ramon more than you think. And the weight of that moment doesn't disappear when you walk away from the table. It follows you home. It sits with you in silence. And sometimes it's only when the humiliation becomes public that the next layer of the story begins to unfold. If the first injustice was quiet, this one was loud in all the ways that matter. Humiliation has a particular sound, not always a shout, but a laugh that lingers too long, a comment made just loud enough for others to hear, a pause that invites witnesses. Ramon didn't just receive a dying donkey, he received it in front of everyone. And that detail changes everything. Pain in private already hurts, but pain displayed turns into something heavier. It becomes shame. The foreman, emboldened by power he didn't earn himself, couldn't resist turning the moment into a spectacle. His tone carried mockery, that casual cruelty people adopt when they know there will be no consequences. The donkey was pushed forward as if it were garbage being discarded, not a living creature, not the final payment for 30 years of labor. Around them, other workers stood still. No one laughed openly. No one intervened. Silence spread like dust in the air, thick and unavoidable. That silence matters. It's easy to judge it from the outside, but most adults watching recognize it immediately. Those men weren't indifferent. They were trapped. They had families to feed, debts waiting at home, fears they didn't dare name. When survival is on the line, dignity often becomes negotiable. And that's how systems like this keep running, not through constant violence, but through quiet compliance. Then came the false choice, delivered with a shrug that pretended to be reasonable. Take it, or keep working for less. On the surface, it sounded like an option. In reality, it was a trap. These are the kinds of choices life sometimes throws at people who don't have safety nets, choices where both doors lead to loss, and the only difference is how visible the wound will be. When survival turns into leverage, dignity becomes a luxury item, something nice to have, but rarely affordable. This is controlled indignation. Not rage, not chaos, but a slow burning awareness that something is deeply wrong. The kind that makes your jaw tighten without you realizing it. Because most people have lived a version of this scene. Maybe it was a boss who humiliated them in a meeting. Maybe it was a contract renegotiated by the book that left them cornered. Maybe it was being forced to accept less just to keep food on the table, while everyone pretended it was fair. Public humiliation doesn't just wound the person targeted, it sends a message to everyone watching. This could be you. And that message works. It keeps people in line. It trains silence. Ramon felt it, standing there holding the rope, surrounded by witnesses who couldn't help him even if they wanted to. The donkey, weak and trembling, became a symbol not just of his payment, but of his position in that moment, exposed, powerless, judged. Yet even here, something subtle is forming beneath the surface. Humiliation, when endured without becoming bitterness, has a strange way of revealing character, both in the one who inflicts it and in the one who carries it. And as the crowd slowly dispersed and Ramon turned away, the real question wasn't what had been taken from him, but what he would do with the weight he'd just been handed. There's a kind of silence that isn't weakness. It doesn't come from fear alone, and it certainly doesn't come from agreement. It comes from calculation, from experience, from knowing deep down that speaking up in that moment would cost more than it would heal. Ramon understood this kind of silence well. He didn't shout. He didn't argue. He didn't throw the donkey's rope back at Don Fermin's feet and demand justice, not because he lacked courage, but because he had responsibilities heavier than his pride. This is where the story quietly connects with adults who've lived long enough to know that life isn't a movie. In films, confrontation is heroic and satisfying. In real life, confrontation can mean unemployment, retaliation, blacklisting, or worse. Ramon had a family, a daughter watching his every move, learning what it meant to be strong in a world that doesn't always reward honesty. He wasn't just deciding for himself in that moment, he was deciding for all of them. There's an old truth most people learn the hard way. Not every battle is fought with raised voices. Some are fought with restraint, with endurance, with the ability to walk away without letting the humiliation turn you into someone you don't recognize. Ramon chose not to humiliate back. He refused to mirror cruelty, and that choice, though invisible to most, required a strength far greater than shouting ever would. Many people listening to this have swallowed words that burned their throats. They've nodded in meetings when they wanted to scream. They've accepted terms that felt unfair because the alternative felt dangerous. Parents especially understand this. When you're responsible for others, your ego doesn't get to drive the car anymore. You learn to prioritize stability over pride, long-term survival over short-term victory. Silence, in those moments, becomes a shield, a way to protect what still matters when everything else feels compromised. But here's the nuance most shallow stories miss. Silence doesn't mean acceptance. Ramon didn't agree with what happened. He simply chose not to let the injustice define his response. There's a quiet dignity in that, the kind that doesn't demand applause, but slowly builds something stronger underneath. Think about your own life for a second. A job you stayed in longer than you should have. A situation where you bit your tongue because the consequences of honesty felt too heavy. That wasn't cowardice. That was survival. And survival, when guided by values instead of resentment, can become the foundation for something better later on. Ramon walked away that day carrying more than a rope and a dying animal. He carried the weight of unspoken words, yes, but also a decision not to let bitterness take root, not to poison his home with anger. That restraint didn't look heroic to the crowd, but it set the stage for what would happen next, because sometimes, when a person chooses silence over chaos, life finds another way to speak. And as Ramon led the donkey home, the question wasn't whether he had lost that day, but whether this quiet choice would eventually reveal something no one else saw coming. Some transformations don't announce themselves. They don't arrive with applause, speeches, or dramatic music in the background. They begin quietly, almost invisibly, in small choices that most people would consider insignificant. Ramon's house was modest, the kind of place built more on effort than comfort. When he arrived with the donkey, there was no plan, no strategy, no hidden hope of reward, just a simple decision. We don't abandon what's already been broken. His family didn't ask many questions. They saw the animal's condition before they heard the story. Skin stretched thin, ribs exposed, breathing shallow. And yet, instead of recoiling, Carmela stepped closer. Children often notice what adults have trained themselves to ignore. She didn't see a useless animal. She saw suffering. With hands still small and clumsy, she began cleaning the donkey's wounds, carefully, patiently, as if every movement mattered. Because to her, it did. There was no miracle in the traditional sense, no sudden strength returned, no instant healing. What the donkey received was far less glamorous and far more powerful. Water, shade, time, food placed gently, even when it barely ate. Someone speaking softly, not expecting anything in return. And here's the line that changes how we see everything that follows, even if it's never said out loud. It wasn't getting better because of magic. It was getting better because, for the first time, someone was treating it the way it deserved. This is where the emotional current shifts. Anger gives way to tenderness. Resentment loosens its grip. Hope, fragile but real, starts to breathe. Many people watching recognize this pattern immediately. They've lived it. Healing in real life rarely looks dramatic. It looks repetitive. It looks boring from the outside. It looks like showing up again tomorrow, when nothing seems different yet. Care has a strange way of revealing hidden value. Not creating it, revealing it. The donkey didn't become valuable because Carmela cared for it. It had value all along. It simply had never been given the conditions to show it. And this idea lands hard for anyone who's ever been labeled past their prime, replaceable, or not worth the investment. There's a quiet lesson here, one that mentors learn and teach slowly. The way something responds to care tells you more about its potential than the way it collapses under neglect. In practical terms, this applies everywhere. A neglected skill doesn't mean a useless person. A tired marriage doesn't mean a dead one. Sometimes the question isn't, is this worth saving, but has this ever been properly cared for? Ramon didn't make speeches about dignity, he modeled it. In his home, pain wasn't mocked, weakness wasn't exploited. And Carmela, watching all of this, was learning something no school could teach her, that care itself is a form of quiet resistance, a refusal to let cruelty have the final word. As days passed, subtle changes began to appear, not enough to celebrate, not enough to announce, just enough to notice. And often it's in these barely perceptible shifts that deeper truths begin to surface. Because sometimes, when care is given without agenda, it uncovers something hidden, something that changes how the entire story will eventually be understood. Children have a way of saying the truest things without realizing how heavy they are. Carmela had been watching quietly for days, not just the donkey, but her father too. The way Ramon moved slower than he used to, the way his shoulders seemed to carry more than just fatigue. One afternoon, while gently brushing the dust from the animal's back, she looked up at him and said something simple, almost innocent. "You and my dad look alike." She wasn't trying to be poetic, she was observing. And that observation landed harder than any insult Don Fermin had delivered. That's when the story deepens from injustice into psychology. The donkey wasn't just an animal anymore. It had become a reflection. Like Ramon, it had worked until there was almost nothing left to give. Like Ramon, it had been useful for years and discarded the moment it slowed down. Like Ramon, its value had been measured only by output, never by worth. And in that mirror, something uncomfortable but clarifying emerged. Many adults recognize this moment instinctively. There's a point in life when you realize you've been running on empty longer than you should have. You've normalized exhaustion. You've accepted neglect as the cost of being responsible. And when someone finally treats you with care, real care, not performative kindness, it feels strange, almost suspicious. You don't know how to receive it. The donkey didn't resist because it was stubborn. It hesitated because neglect had taught it not to expect gentleness. This is where the metaphor quietly teaches without lecturing. The donkey represents the exploited worker, yes, but more than that, it represents anyone whose dignity has been slowly eroded by systems that reward output and ignore humanity. People don't break all at once. They wear down, a little less energy here, a little less hope there, until one day someone looks at them and only sees what they can no longer do. Ramon saw himself in that animal, whether he wanted to or not, and Carmela saw it too. That matters, because children often name truths adults avoid. She wasn't accusing, she wasn't blaming. She was simply connecting dots, and those dots formed a question that lingered in the air. If this animal deserves patience, rest, and care. Don't you? There's a subtle lesson here for anyone listening closely. When you start seeing yourself as disposable, you begin living accordingly. You overgive, you underrest, you tolerate treatment you wouldn't accept for someone you love, and over time, you forget what dignity feels like. The donkey didn't lose its value by being mistreated, but it did lose its strength. The same happens to people. This is why environments matter. Care doesn't just heal, it reveals. Under gentler conditions, the donkey's posture began to change. Its eyes softened, small signs, barely noticeable but real. And Ramon, watching this unfold, was being confronted with an uncomfortable possibility. Maybe what he thought was the end of usefulness was actually the result of prolonged neglect. And just when the story seems settled into this quiet rhythm of recovery, something unexpected begins to surface. Something physical, small, easy to miss at first. A detail that doesn't fit. A mark that raises questions. Because sometimes, right when we think we understand our reflection, life reveals a hidden detail that forces us to look again. Recovery has a rhythm. Slow, uneven, almost boring if you're expecting fireworks. That's why most people miss the details that matter. As the donkey began to stabilize, not healed, not strong, just no longer collapsing, Ramon noticed something he hadn't before. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't obvious. Just a small weathered mark on the animal's ear, half hidden by dirt and old scars, the kind of detail you only see when you stop rushing. At first, he dismissed it. When you've lived a life of scarcity, curiosity feels like a luxury. You focus on what's urgent, food, shelter, tomorrow, but the mark stayed in his mind. It didn't match the image of a worthless animal. It looked intentional. Old, yes, but deliberate. As if someone, long ago, had thought this donkey was worth identifying. Mystery works best when it doesn't shout, it whispers. Ramon didn't run to the village asking questions. He simply observed, thought about it while feeding the animal, while walking behind it at dusk, while listening to Carmela talk to it as if it understood everything. The more he watched, the clearer it became. This donkey wasn't common. Not in behavior, not in build, and now, not in history. Here's where the story quietly tightens its grip on the audience. Most people have experienced this feeling, realizing that something they dismissed too quickly might carry a hidden story. A person you underestimated, a job you thought was meaningless, even yourself. There's a strange discomfort in discovering that what you labeled as nothing special may have been shaped by a past you never bothered to ask about. The mark hinted at lineage, at ownership, at value assigned long before neglect set in. And that's a powerful idea, because value doesn't disappear when circumstances change. It just becomes harder to recognize. The donkey's condition had fooled everyone, including Ramon. But that mark suggested a different narrative, one that contradicted Don Fermin's casual dismissal. Psychologically, this moment does something important. It introduces uncertainty without resolution. It invites patience. In a world addicted to instant answers, mystery forces the audience to stay present, to lean in, to wait. Ramon didn't know what the mark meant yet, and neither did anyone watching. But intuition began doing its quiet work. There's a mentor-level lesson hiding here. People and things with depth often don't advertise it. Their value is coded, not broadcast. You only notice when you slow down enough to look closely. This applies far beyond the story. Careers stall, talents go unnoticed, relationships fade. Not because they lacked worth, but because no one took the time to recognize the markings left by their past. Ramon considered asking around. He hesitated, not because he was afraid of the answer, but because he sensed that once the truth surfaced, things wouldn't stay quiet. And quiet, for now, felt safe. But the mark wouldn't let itself be ignored. It was a reminder that neglect can hide history, but it can't erase it. And somewhere beyond Ramon's home, beyond his small circle, there were people who would recognize that mark instantly, people whose memories stretched further back, people whose names carried weight in the community, the kind of recognition that doesn't just explain an animal's past, but exposes a much larger truth waiting to be revealed in public. Truth has a timing of its own. It doesn't rush, and it doesn't ask permission. When it finally shows up, it tends to choose public spaces, the very places where silence once felt safer. The revelation didn't come from Ramon demanding justice or exposing anyone. It came through recognition. Don Octavio, an elder respected not for his wealth but for his memory, noticed the donkey during a routine visit. He stopped, looked closer, and everything shifted. He recognized the mark immediately. Not because it was flashy, but because it was rare. It belonged to the Altamirano lineage, a family known for breeding strong, resilient animals decades ago. That donkey wasn't common at all. It was valuable by origin, not by appearance. Neglect had masked its worth, but it hadn't erased it. And once Don Octavio spoke, the story could no longer be contained within Ramon's quiet home. The truth unfolded in front of the same community that had once watched in silence. That matters. Public humiliation had been the weapon used against Ramon, so public truth became the corrective. Not through shouting, not through revenge, just facts, spoken calmly. The donkey had been worth far more than Don Fermin admitted. He hadn't just been dismissive, he had been deceptive. What followed wasn't chaos. It was something colder, heavier, collective silence. People didn't need to argue or accuse. They simply looked at Don Fermin differently. Respect drained from the room. The kind of respect that once lost can't be negotiated back. This is an important distinction. Violence wasn't required. Punishment didn't need force. Shame, when deserved, works on its own. This moment resonates deeply with adults because it mirrors real life. Power often survives on secrecy and intimidation, but once truth is spoken clearly, without exaggeration, it changes the social atmosphere. People recalibrate. Alliances shift. Silence, once protective, becomes judgment. Don Fermin wasn't attacked. He was seen, and that was worse. Here's the subtle wisdom hiding here. Justice doesn't always look like compensation. Sometimes it looks like exposure. Sometimes it's the loss of narrative control. Don Fermin could no longer pretend to be fair. The contract didn't protect him anymore because the community now understood the gap between legality and morality. For Ramon, this wasn't about triumph. He didn't smile, he didn't celebrate, he stood still, letting the truth speak for itself. That restraint elevated him in ways no argument ever could. And for anyone watching, there's a lesson worth carrying forward. When you let truth surface naturally, without forcing it, it carries a weight that shouting never will. The donkey stood there quietly, the unlikely centerpiece of the moment. a reminder that what we discard can sometimes become the evidence that reveals us. And as the crowd dispersed, one thing was clear: this wasn't the end. Exposure is powerful, but what follows exposure is choice. And Don Fermin was about to face one he couldn't outsource or escape. Pride doesn't collapse all at once. It erodes quietly, the same way respect does when it's taken for granted. After the truth surfaced, Don Fermin didn't lose his land, his money, or his position overnight. What he lost was something far more destabilizing: the invisible agreement that made people take him seriously. No one needed to confront him anymore. No one needed to argue. The silence around him changed texture. It was no longer fear-based. It was distance. He noticed it in small ways first. Conversations that ended when he approached. Eyes that no longer sought his approval. Invitations that stopped coming. This is how pride falls in real life. Not with scandal headlines, but with social isolation. And that kind of fall is particularly painful because there's no one to blame, no enemy to fight. Just a mirror. Eventually, Don Fermin did what many people do when power no longer shields them. He reached out, not from strength but from need. The apology came late. Awkward. Unpolished. It wasn't theatrical. It didn't erase the past. And that's important. Redemption that arrives too cleanly feels dishonest. This one felt human, flawed, incomplete. Ramon listened, and this is where the story avoids the trap of cheap victory. He could have humiliated Don Fermin in return. He had the moral high ground. He had public validation, but he chose something else. Not because Don Fermin deserved mercy, but because Ramon didn't want to become shaped by resentment. He understood something many people learn too late. Humiliation, even when justified, poisons the person delivering it. This choice is the final lesson, and it's a mature one. Forgiveness here isn't approval, it's release. Ramon wasn't saying, "What you did was fine." He was saying, "I refuse to let this define who I become next." That distinction matters. It's the difference between strength and submission. There's a mentor-level truth woven into this ending. Justice that destroys leaves ruins. Justice that reveals leaves responsibility. Don Fermin wasn't crushed, he was exposed, and exposure forces self-confrontation. Whether he truly changed afterward is almost beside the point. The story isn't about his redemption arc, it's about Ramon's integrity remaining intact. For the audience, especially adults who've lived through unfair systems, this resonates deeply. Not every injustice gets fixed. Not every apology arrives on time. But character isn't built by outcomes alone. It's built by the choices made when outcomes are imperfect. Ramon prospered later, yes, but that prosperity began internally, the moment he chose not to let bitterness be his legacy. The final message lingers quietly. True justice doesn't need revenge. It doesn't need spectacle. It reveals what was hidden, then steps aside and lets people deal with themselves. And often, that's the heaviest consequence of all. Because when pride falls on its own, there's no one left to catch it. Now the story rests in your hands, not Ramon's, not Don Fermin's, yours. Because stories like this don't exist just to be heard. They exist to confront us, to quietly ask questions we usually avoid when life gets loud. And the most important one is this. What do you do when life pays you with something you didn't deserve? Many people spend years trying to correct the injustice itself, and sometimes that's necessary, but often the deeper work happens somewhere else. It happens in how you respond when no one is watching, in how you treat what's been neglected, in whether you allow bitterness to become your personality or wisdom to become your legacy. Think about it honestly. Have you been carrying resentment that's heavier than the original offense? Have you allowed unfair treatment to convince you that your value has expired? Or maybe you've been so focused on proving others wrong that you forgot to take care of what's still alive in you. Just like the donkey in this story, potential doesn't disappear because it was ignored. It disappears when it's never given the conditions to recover. Here's a practical challenge you can take with you today. Look at one area of your life that feels worn down. It could be your career, your marriage, your health, or even your sense of purpose. Instead of asking, "Why did this happen to me?" try asking, "What would care look like here?" Not grand gestures, not miracles, just water, shade, and time, consistency instead of drama, respect instead of urgency. And another question, this one might sting a little. Have you ever been Don Fermin to someone else? Maybe not intentionally, maybe by hiding behind rules, routines, or convenience. Sometimes injustice isn't loud cruelty, it's quiet neglect. Growth requires the courage to see ourselves clearly, not just sympathetically. What makes this story powerful isn't that justice eventually appeared, it's that it appeared without destroying anyone. Truth was revealed. Pride fell on its own, and integrity remained intact. That's rare, and it's something worth aiming for in your own life. You don't need revenge to move forward. You don't need applause to stay honorable. You need clarity. You need courage. And sometimes you need patience that feels uncomfortable. So let me ask you directly, what part of this story felt uncomfortably familiar? Was it the silence, the humiliation, the care, or the moment when truth finally surfaced? I'd really like to know. Share it in the comments, not for me, but for you. Naming something is often the first step toward changing it. If this message spoke to you, help us spread it. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next stories we're building here. Turn on notifications, because consistency matters, not just in algorithms, but in growth. And share this video with someone who's quietly carrying more than they should. Sometimes, one story is enough to remind someone they're not broken, just overdue for care. The real question isn't whether injustice exists. It does. The real question is whether you'll let it define you or refine you.